Welcome, everybody. We're so happy that you are able to join us and be part of this experience. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the CS4All technical supports being provided by Trivium Consulting are funded by the NSF and are in partnership with STARS Computing Core. I wanted to remind you all that we are recording, and also just make sure that you know that you are at the CS4All Technical Supports Logic Model webinar. It's like when we're on a plane, we want to make sure we're on the right plane headed for the right city. Great, next slide. So welcome. These are the folks who are going to be supporting you today. I'm here again for those of you who I saw last time at the other webinar. I'm Elizabeth Tobias, and today we have Megan Maloney with us, who is Trivium's Director of Content and Projects. She's going to be leading the majority of this workshop today. She has over 25 years of experience writing federal grants and an over 70% success rate doing so. And her grants have included the NSF, the NOAA, the NIH, Department of Ed, Department of Justice, as well as private foundations. Megan has served as a co-PI on 3 NSF grants and 1 NOAA grant, each focused on STEM education and research. And her prior experience also includes spearheading the development of online educational experiences for Fortune 500 companies, IHEs, and nonprofits, and leading a company creating media for formal and informal learning. I'm Elizabeth Tobias. You guys have met me before. I'm the project director for the CS4All Technical Support Project. I'm a grant writer and lead project manager with Trivium Consulting. I landed here after 2.5 decades of working in the nonprofit arts and arts education sectors, creating curriculum and raising funds and writing and managing grants. We will be doing a Q&A board today. So if you have questions throughout the meeting, please drop them in the Q&A board. We're going to avoid the chat because then it sort of interrupts the flow of our speaker. We'll have plenty of time at the end to go through questions. And just again, as I said at the beginning, because a couple more people have joined, we are recording, and we do ask that you keep your microphones muted just so that we don't wind up with ambient noise until we get to the point where if we need to unmute anybody to ask questions later, we can certainly do that because it's not the same size as our initial webinar. Great, next slide. So just to make sure that we are all clear on our goals today. So our goal today is to provide an approach to ideation. You know, when I was able to collect all of the exit surveys and all of the different participants shared what supports they were looking for, the vast majority of our participants in the CS4All technical support program, when they filled out those surveys, requested some sort of support with ideation. So we're curating a series of webinars to help you with this, specifically thinking about the CS4All proposals. This is the first of those. There'll be another one on Monday, which I'll be sending out information about that very soon. And the goal for this is to keep you moving forward, with ideation, to keep you moving forward with development of a project that has the best possibility of becoming a responsive and competitive proposal. And just a reminder also that we are providing technical support for small and medium class size CS4All RPP strand proposals. Those are the only versions of these proposals that we're able to provide technical support on because of the limitations of our funding. So Megan today will be focusing on creating a logic model to support project ideation and inform proposal development. And even if you're not including it in your narrative, it's really a great and effective tool and an efficient tool for organizing that ideation. And then it becomes an excellent resource as you write your narrative to keep you on track. Great, next slide. So our agenda today, in order to accomplish these goals, Megan will first go over the logic model uses and then its components and processes. And finally, she'll walk through a sample, and we will have ample time at the end for a Q&A. We will share a template with you at the end of this meeting, and it will also be posted on the website so you can take the next steps with your project ideation, however this tool serves you. Next slide. Just one more reminder, please, to put Q&As in the Q&A box, right? So click that option and we'll get to them at the end. Next slide. Just a reminder of some important dates. I've just shared one with you that there'll be another webinar workshop on Monday, and I'll be sharing out that link shortly after this meeting. This one will be another ideation webinar, this time focused specifically on aligning your proposal with the RFP, and some sort of tips and ideas about how to make it the most competitive, well-aligned proposal that you can. Again, that was something that many of the participants, the vast majority, asked for, so that's why we're doing this in this format. And then just a reminder, of course, that the deadline for CSforAll is June 4th, 2024 at 5 p.m., the submitting organization's time zone, local time. Next slide. And I did want to cover this one more time because I know there's been some confusion out in the community. So I just want to make sure that everybody is fully aware, and I have double checked this with Allison Kennedy, RPO at the NSF. Eligibility for this CSforAll solicitation, the language in the RFP is correct. Proposals may only be submitted by IHEs, nonprofit, non-academic institutions, or tribal nations. I know that this is different than some other solicitations and than it has been in the past. There's the can be or is definitely and may be eligible. This is a change. So local government agencies or state government agencies or for-profits cannot be a submitter. They can absolutely be a subawardee and should certainly, but they cannot be a submitting organization. So for those of you who have partnerships, you just need to shift if you have, say, a county office of education, that cannot be the submitting organization. If it is, it will just get declined. And we certainly don't want that to happen to you. All of your work and your great projects and your amazing ideas, we don't want that to be impacted in that way. Great, next slide, please. So now I'm going to turn it over. That's all you need to listen to me today, which is fantastic. Now I'm going to turn it over to Megan, who is going to handle the bulk of our experience today. Take it away, Megan.
Hello, everyone. I want to say a special hello to those of you who I've already met and even in some cases worked with before through our API Summit last summer, which was really great. I'm excited that some of those people have decided to join with us in this work as well. And also to say a special hello to those of you who I haven't met yet, and I hope I'll be working with you over the next few weeks to help you move your project along. So looking forward to all of that. So as Elizabeth said, I'm going to be talking about logic models. And I want to recognize that I know from looking at who has been signing up for our technical assistance that we have people from a really wide variety of backgrounds and experience levels. So I'm sure what I'm going to be covering today could be old news to some or most of you. Some parts of it might still be of use to you. I hope it will be of use to you. And I think that and as Elizabeth said, we'll be providing a template as well. So my goal will be to cover some of the basics around logic models, and then through the Q&A that we can all share and learn from each other to enrich that. So I think everybody's going to I hope everybody has something to bring to that conversation because I won't be talking, hopefully, for that long. My second caveat I want to bring up before I dive into this is that there's no really one right way to create a logic model. And that's true whether you're putting your logic model in the proposal or not, but really, or if you're just using it for your own thinking purposes. These illustrations I put up here are just a few that I just was quickly able to find on the internet, and you can see that they're very different from each other, and they are different because of how they're being used and what their purpose is. So, and I know some people, especially people who come from a research background, may prefer to work with a theory of change approach rather than a logic model, which is more focused on causal mechanisms. And that is a value, and that's also something that you may want to build your logic model into as you're building the case for your research base. But for today, I'm just going to be talking about the template that we typically use, which is a very kind of vanilla, I'll say, logic model that's really meant to be a thinking tool more than anything else. So it's not particularly attractive. So if you did want to build this into something you'd want to put into your proposal, I think you'd want to make it a little more nice looking than what ours looks like. And again, I don't want to communicate that the model that we're going to walk through today is necessarily the right model for you. But pretty much all logic models have one major element in common, and that being it's basically a visual way to lay out the ideation of your project in order to communicate the key elements and then interrogate them for a logical flow. So that's really kind of the key to me, is that the logic model's purpose is, as you're developing a project with a team of people, it's one thing to sit around in a meeting and say, oh yeah, we'll do these activities and we'll do this thing. But until you all put them down on a piece of paper and all look at them and say, yes, this really is what we've been talking about. And then you say, but does A really lead to B? And does B really lead to C? And that's what the advantage of the logic model is, that it will really, push you to raise that bar for yourselves. The other overarching idea I want to cover is that whether you do or do not choose to include the logic model in your proposal, it's totally up to you. It is required in some NSF solicitations, but it is not required in this one. So sometimes it can be a way to save space in your narrative, depending on how your objectives and your evaluation are tying into each other. And other times there just isn't a logical place to put it in your narrative because the order of which you're talking about things, etc. So, oops, sorry. So that really, as I said, that underlying purpose is for you, your RPP, and your evaluator to really communicate with each other and be sure that you are truly communicating the ideas. It can surface your misunderstandings or misconceptions, and it'll also really help you start thinking about budget allocations. And if you get to the point where you need to start making budget cuts, as you're developing, it will help you decide where to do that. And it'll also help you keep in mind whether or not the ideas you're developing are aligned with the RFP and they will be competitive. So those are some of the things I'm going to cover. So long story short, a logic model is just a really valuable tool. I recommend you draft one as early as possible in your process, and continue to revisit it in your ideation meetings to be sure everyone's on the same page. And as a note, the information I'm going to be covering will be in addition to what's written on the slides. So as I get to each slide, I'm going to try to remember to pause for a moment, let everyone read what's on the slide, since I don't think you need me to read it to you. And then I will launch in and start talking after that point. So with that, we will start talking about logic models. So writing a grant's a lot of work, as we all know. And before you start down that path, it's important to be sure you're heading in the right direction. And this is really for us where the logic model always starts. And that's being sure that your project is going to help the funder achieve its goals. If it isn't a tight fit between your project and their goals, it's just not going to be competitive. And so this is really where we always start when we think about it. And I know this might sound like a little bit of a well, duh moment, but I am sad to say that there are a lot of proposals that get submitted to NSF that really don't align with that particular solicitation. They may be, and often are, really important project ideas, and they really need to get underway. But if they're not a fit for that specific solicitation, they're just not going to get funded. So building the logic model also helps you answer this really, these first important questions around whether or not it's the right fit, or if you should be looking for a different solicitation that's going to work better for you. Okay, so in addition to assuring the fit, oops, sorry, I want to just back up one. There we go. So in addition to assuring the fit with the solicitation, there's some pretty clear guidelines that you need your project to fit. And of course, that's the intellectual merit and the broader impacts and the solicitation specific criteria. So I'm not going to go into what each of these are defined as in this webinar. That's really much more what we'll be covering in the Monday webinar, which will be looking more deeply into the solicitation itself. But I'm just kind of introducing these ideas now because they're going to come up as we go into the logic model template. Of course, everybody knows that intellectual merit and the broader impacts are at the core of every NSF solicitation. And then this solicitation also has solicitation specific criteria. And that is also something new in this version of the CS4All proposal. It had always kind of been stated as something that was included, but now it has become a very specific with specific solicitation specific criteria against which the proposals will be judged. And it does say in this, I did not add this bold text. It does say in the RFP, proposals that do not adequately address these additional criteria will be declined. And that is all new language this year. So it is something that we want to be sure people are paying attention to. Okay, so now the next few slides that you're going to see, all these blue ones, are the information that's actually on the logic model template that we'll be making available to you. So this is basically, except ours will be white with black text, but basically this is what you'll be seeing when we send you that or make that template available. So these are the first prompts that we put on the logic model template, going back to what I was saying before, that being sure that your goal is tightly aligned with the NSF goal for this particular solicitation. So the reason we start here is rather than trying to categorize things right away, we want to really think about these big questions. And then using these questions as a jumping off point with your RPP, it'll really help you start with a agreed upon direction before you get into the weeds of things like who is doing what and is there enough budget and all those kinds of things. So this is really that important starting point. Then the next piece on the template is, as I introduced a moment ago, is this required BPC alignment. So this next prompts are surfacing those BPC questions specifically. These are core to the CS4All now, and they really need to be addressed before going any further. Because if these can't be answered with a compelling argument, you won't be competitive. And so because these questions have existed in other NSF proposals in past years. It's in the iTest, it's in a few other places, but this is, obviously something that's become much more core to the CS4All. This might be where you want to consider what research framework you're using, and is it appropriate to the community, BPC community that you are focusing on? The research base for your interventions, why are you choosing to approach your activities the way you are? Are they appropriate to this audience? Why are they appropriate to this audience? So being able to put some strong bullets in this section in the logic model is also going to start to serve as a outline for your literature review once you get to the proposals. So really being able to put these things in here and make an argument for yourself around why is this going to meet the BPC goals. So now we start into the traditional looking logic model template. And again, I want to emphasize you don't have to use this template, and we agree it is not very attractive. So hopefully you would make it look better than this if you do decide to put something like this in your proposal. But this is really just one tool that can help you. So this is where we always start, and that is with the strategic impact. And after thinking about the goal alignment and the BPC, we recommend that you start here. So what this will do is it's going to continue to test your alignment with the NSF merit review criteria. So what are your broader impacts? What is your intellectual merit? What are your other broader impacts, as well as broadening participation? So for those of you who are in education, this is basically using the Wiggins and Matai backward design approach, where you start by identifying your desired results, and then we work from right to left when we fill out a logic model. So that is where we start here. Once you've defined these strategic impacts, they're basically going to become your litmus test for the rest of the decisions as you're filling out the logic model, because you're going to have to keep coming back to those and saying, is this logically going to get us there? Hence the name. And you're going to continue to measure all of your project design decisions against these long-term impacts. So now that you've aligned your strategic impact with the merit review criteria and the NSF goals, so what will that look like in your on-the-ground project? And this is now where you start asking yourself that question. And really importantly, what will you be measuring to see if you are successful? So this is the point by which, and maybe even before, hopefully before, you're going to need your evaluator in the room and really be talking with that person about measurable outcomes and how those measurable outcomes are going to meet your strategic goal. So having this kind of conversation with the evaluator there is going to be very important, because if you want to be sure that by the time you get done with what you've done, that you can show success. And since these are all going to be RPP projects that we're talking about today, you may want to think about one of your outcomes being specific to your RPP. So do you want to result in a larger scale project? If so, what outcomes would you need from your RPP at the end of this project in order to be prepared for that? So really think about all your outcomes, not just necessarily for your community of interest, but really what are the outcomes for your school or your district or your state or nationally, et cetera. So really kind of think about that. And then also, of course, the outcomes for the intellectual merit. Once you have that filled in, then the next step will be this review and revise step. And this is where you want to just kind of, this is your first version of your litmus test. Do my outcomes clearly, logically, will they lead to this strategic impact? So this is where you want to start to interrogate your vision using the logic model to do that. So will you have a research base that you can point to, either yours or someone else's, that these outcomes will lead to that strategic impact? Or is that really just aspirational? In which case you might need to kind of think through that and think about what other outcomes you might have that you can say, clearly, if we have these outcomes, we have reason to believe, we have research that shows us that it will lead to these impacts. And then once you're confident that these are aligned, then you can move on to the next step, which is now how you begin to describe how you're going to make all this happen. So at this point, I usually like to think through the outputs and the activities in tandem. And I will say that thinking through the activities can sometimes be a pain point for a project team. This is, where things start to need to be prioritized, and it's all becoming very real. And of course, there are a lot of things that your different partners who each have different perspectives and in some cases, different priorities. It does start to become a question of what's in the project and what's not. And of course, as we all know, the money does not go as far as we all want it to. So really this having started on the right side, which I guess for you guys is probably over here, but having started on the right side and moving backwards, you've at least put a stake in the ground to make it clear where you have to go with those activities. And so this review and revise iteration here may happen several times as you try to identify, what's in and what's out of the project. So this is the true value of the logic model now for planning is if an activity is not directly leading to your outcomes and your impact, then you have to decide, does that activity belong in this project? And if it does, then what changes do you need to make in your outcomes and your strategic plan to make this articulate all the way across? Because you don't want to have an activity that doesn't appear to contribute to your outcome or your impact. And if you do make those changes in your outcomes and your strategic plan, then how does that begin to affect your merit review criteria? So you have to kind of go up one more step and say, well, what's that going to do? And have we now shifted away, for example, from the community of impact that we had earlier identified and the way we wanted to do things to reach that specific community? So, really kind of asking yourself, have we wandered off the path and started to craft a project that's not going to be as competitive? And so this is that point where you get this on paper and you could kind of look at it all and be sure there really is that logical flow. And I would also just remind you, this is another really important checkpoint with your evaluator. So being sure that these activities and outputs are going to be able to generate data that will allow them to measure your outcomes. So being sure that all those things have been looked at and will be observable and measurable in some way, whether that's qualitative or quantitative. And also, this is the point to think about your formative evaluation and when it would make sense to insert that in your activities in order for it to be useful for project improvement. So really, this is, as you get to this point, thinking about really definitely integrating the evaluation into your whole process. Okay, oops, one more. All right, so then we get to inputs. So now the point is where your team has agreed on a project plan, and the scary question is, what's it going to take to do this? So do you need some other partners who might bring on some expertise that isn't already sitting in the room with you? Do you need access to some other kinds of networks that a partner might help you with? Do you need other resources that aren't available to you? And what about an advisory board? Where will they be coming from? And then, of course, the painful question, how much is it going to cost? So these questions are going to lead to another process of review and revise, because I don't know if anybody on this webinar has ever written their budget the first time and had it come in under budget. It seems impossible, right? But really, this is the point where you say, well, if we can't afford everything, what are those things that we might be able to change that are still going to get us to our strategic impact? So you have to kind of reinterrogate these middle columns. And again, if you say, well, we literally can't meet that strategic impact for the amount of money we have possible to us, then you have to think about how are you going to revise the strategic impact and then work backwards again. So I know it sounds painful. A lot of people ask me, how long does all this take? And honestly, if you had all of your partners in the room and if you all locked yourself in a room for about a day and a half, I would think you could probably do it pretty well, most of it all the way through, including, a quick rev on a budget, a rough budget, and to kind of look at that and a reality check. I think the way it most often happens, of course, is a series of long and ongoing Zoom calls. The thing that I suggest to people is try and keep those as compact as possible. Don't make it a weekly meeting or a bi-weekly meeting. Just really set aside, a few 2 to 3 hour chunks of time in a pretty small space, because the time you lose trying to remember why you made those decisions between these columns really can slow things down. So here is an example of a partial logic model that I filled in using this template. Obviously, this isn't complete for any one project, and I was really just, making things up as kind of examples. I do have a confession to make, which is I tried to make this example before I wrote the other slides and had really systematized exactly what needed to go in each column. And I also started by writing the activities first. And so after I wrote all the other slides and really walked through the system and had all the definitions in there, I had to come back here and redo the whole logic model. So that's why I want to start on the right-hand side of the strategic impact, because really you can't start with the activities no matter how many times you've done it. So just a heads up on that. So I think that's really it. I mean, that's the encapsulated version of what's a logic model and how do we use that particular tool. And so I think I'm going to turn it over to questions at this point.
Before we do that, I just wanted to reiterate a couple things that Megan brought up that connect to what we covered in our first informational webinar. Thank you, Megan, for all of that. I think she said something really important that, again, I've been writing grants for various types of organizations for 25 years, all over different sectors, but there is a tendency that is a really natural, there's no judgment on it, it's a natural one that shows up over and over again, which is the folks who are seeking money because they are passionate about a project or an idea. And when we are the ones seeking that money, we forget sometimes that the folks who are giving money, they have the same reality, right? Whether it's a private foundation or a public funding agency, they are giving money because they have a certain a mission. Again, even if it's a public agency. And I see so many times folks go, I have this idea and I'm just going to cram it into this, I'm going to cram this square peg into this round hole. I'm going to make it fit. And the reality is you won't get funded, or God forbid you do. I came in and assisted a theater a long time ago that they had gotten a grant that they somehow or another, they told the story well enough to cram that square peg into that round hole. And they couldn't actually do the project in a way that was responsive to what the funder actually wanted because it didn't fit. So as painful as that can be sometimes, it's so valuable to you to not waste your time or to get in over your head. So I would just say that first step that Megan talked about really being clear about why is this money available to you? What are the guidelines? Start there. And then the only other thing I wanted to say about it is, and I'm just going to confess, like when Megan and I work together, I do not enjoy logic models. This is not where I am happy. And it reminds me of when I used to dance, and it's like bar work for ballerinas, right? You all want to do the pas de deux when you can't get to the pas de deux without the bar work, and it's tedious, but it holds you accountable. So I just wanted to say those couple of things. It also puts you in a position where you don't wind up over promising because it holds you accountable, and you don't wind up promising more than your project can actually deliver within the limitations of the particular proposal or award that you're seeking. So those are just a couple things to add. There's only a couple things in the questions that I want to push out. A couple of them I answered. They were just logistic questions, so I answered directly. But I will say again, since it came up, and I know some folks came in late, that the logic model template I will be sharing out in an email after this. So you will get the template itself for you to work with if it's valuable to you, and it will also be posted on our website. And then there were also some questions about Monday. Again, I will be inviting everyone to the Monday meeting after this particular meeting. And we will be sharing out the recording of this. And I just have to double check with Megan if she's comfortable with sharing the slides themselves. If the slides themselves are okay, then we'll post that on the website too. So our goal is to give you all the resources that you can so that you can be successful. Somebody asked a question about, and Megan, I'm going to throw this to you, what's the difference between a logic model and a theory of change?
Well, that is one of those things. It's like, what's the difference between an objective and a goal? Everybody has a different answer to that question. In my mind, and this is based on some particular things that I ascribe to. A theory of change is more specifically looking for causal, the causal relationship between things. So the logic model is what we just saw. It says, if we do this, this will happen. If we do this, this will happen. It will lead to this. Whereas the theory of change is looking at, actually I could scroll up to look away for just a moment. I think I have a theory of change. Yeah, so I would call this, can you guys see my cursor? So I would
Yes.
call it top right version up here, to me is more of a theory of change model than a logic model. And I'm looking at what some of these other ones are. And that is because you can see it's got these assumptions. What are the external factors? It's looking at the situation. So it has a lot of other things outside the project itself that are that you're interpreting as causing things to happen. And so your theory of change is, here I theorize these things will cause this to change, as opposed to a logic model, which is focused on how one thing leads to another, or the fact that one thing leads to another. I know that's pretty vague, but that's really the best way to explain it.
And I would say one of the reasons why we chose this as a focus is neither one of those are required in the solicitation. And there are solicitations that ask for one or the other or both. The logic model really keeps you practically moving forward and allows you to hold yourself and your team accountable to winding up with a competitive proposal at the end, which is why we focused on this particular tool. I'm going to split this question up. One part of it I'm going to answer, and then I'm going to throw the other to you, Megan. The question is, first of all, do you have recommendations for evaluators? And I just want to share with everybody that many of you in your exit surveys requested network support, and many said external evaluators is something you're looking for. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we're gathering a list of folks, and I'll be sharing that out with people who have requested it. So just know that that support is coming. We want to make sure that we're curating a list of the contacts that we have that are good for this type of work, and that we share it with you responsibly. And then Megan, the other question is, what portion of the budget should I expect to spend on an external evaluator?
Always a tricky question. I'm thinking about this because it's also a question around the small versus middle level RPP. I think it might be a different answer. Because really in the medium level RPPs, you do have to be looking at, they do want you to be looking at your process as well. So in the small level RPPs strand, you might actually just be building your RPP through that funding. And so in terms of your process evaluation, the things that you're being held to are going to be very different than if you already have an RPP in place and your evaluator needs to be looking at how that RPP is working together, and which is going to be much more time intensive because the number of people involved in needing to be evaluated and, you know, a real 360 look at things. So I think it's, if you're looking for a ratio or a percentage of the funding, I think it's a different answer for the smaller RPP than it would be for the larger one, or for the medium-sized one. All that said, I think, you know, 10% for years and years and years was kind of the going expectation. I think a lot of evaluators still usually think that that's about a starting point, but it also depends on what work you're asking your evaluator to do versus what work the research team is doing. And so in some cases, the evaluator is gathering a lot of data that is then also being passed on to the researchers. And then the researchers are using it for different purposes in their analysis. in which case a lot of that heavy lifting is on the evaluation side. And so the budget would be for the evaluator would expect to reflect that. And, then you are, I think, looking in that 10% area. I think in other cases, it just depends on every team. The research team, part of the team, may actually be doing almost all the evaluation, or excuse me, all the data gathering, and or it may be that you have an online system that's gathering all your student data. Maybe that a lot of the data gathering is automated in one way or another. So the amount of work that the evaluator has to do just to gather the data becomes much smaller, and really their focus then is on analysis. So in that case, you would probably expect to see that number go down. So I know these are all kind of weaselly words, but the answer is, as it always is with NSF, they want to see a budget that aligns with the amount of work you're describing. So if you've given your evaluator a really heavy lift and you're only giving them a 5% budget, you might get some side eye on that. So, but if really what they're doing is some very specific qualitative process evaluation and the rest of it is data analysis, then, and depending on the size of your project and what it is they're what kind of data they're getting, is it purely quantitative data and they're, crunching the numbers, which is hard and takes a lot of time, but it's, less, potentially less time intensive than some other things. So it really is a question of, does your evaluation plan align with the amount of money, good and bad, I mean, high and low, that that you've described in your proposal? Sorry I don't have a flat answer for you.
Here's another question that I think is really on point, and I think it's sort of a simple and direct answer, right? So for the small grants, which is nice after after the answers that we can't give simple and direct, for the small grants, so for a small size RPP, they're all about developing the partnership. Should you focus on that as an outcome along with student and teacher impact also? And I think that's an easy, short, sure, right?
I want to back up one step on that, actually. So in the past, the small grants were focused solely on building an RPP, or those initial steps of an RPP. The new solicitation actually allows for some other types of activities, including, for example, running a small pilot or other things like that. So you might already have an RPP, but still be applying for a small grant. So I just want to clarify that. But back to the question, which was, I'm sorry, what should you evaluate?
Can you, so we're just removing the word all, right? So small grants are not necessarily all about developing the partnership anymore, but they certainly can be. And the question is, should you focus on that as an outcome along with student or teacher impact?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, again, it comes back to your logic model, and if what you've listed as I would assume if your small CS4All is focused on developing the RPP so you can do future work, I would certainly expect a strategic impact and an outcome, there to be strategic impacts and outcomes related to how is that RPP working? How successful are they working together? What does it mean that they're working together? And then you're going to have to measure that. So definitely your evaluation would be looking at that, because if it's listed as an outcome, if it's in your outcome column, it should be in your evaluation or in your research. Somewhere you need to be measuring that outcome.
This is a question I'm going to answer. Can we get feedback on our logic model? And certainly. So what's going to happen is those of you who've requested supports around ideation, given obviously the limitations of our funding, is anybody ever given just unfettered funding that you're like, great, I have all this time and energy and space and resources? This is why we're doing some of these workshops up front, so that we give you tools to take back and get work done. Those of you who have asked specifically for things that we think can only be done one-on-one, we're trying to limit and really be careful about that so that we don't burn up resources and wind up without enough to help everybody. But when you are attached to an expert, it seems to me like a great idea that one of the first things you might do with them is say, hey, here's our logic model. Can you give me feedback on that? Because that way, before you get to say a narrative feedback or a narrative edit, this is a great point at the very beginning. If you're in that early stages of your proposal development, I know we have a wide range, some folks who haven't started at all, and some folks who are almost done and just need sort of back end help or support or feedback. That's a great place to start. Let your grant expert give you feedback on it and point out and hold you accountable, right? And say, hey, I don't see how this lines up. Or have you thought about shifting this activity? That is a really effective and efficient tool that you can do in person with your one-on-one person in a very quick and efficient way. And then the other question that I have here currently is actually a nice segue into what our next webinar on Monday will be. But I don't know, Megan, if you want to do a little tease out here. Could you talk more about what activities and inputs are expected for a small proposal?
Activities and inputs?
That's what the question is.
Not, no, I don't think I can. Because it really does depend on what your outcomes are supposed to be. So I guess what I would say is, if you go back in the RFP, and you're right, this is part of what we'll talk about on Monday.
Yeah.
But in the RFP, I think there are 3 things that are listed that can essentially be the types of kind of activity writ large. One is piloting small projects, one is putting together your RPP, and I'm trying to right now grasping for what that third one is. So I would say I would start there. But that's not the exact actual activities. So then you'd need to go to your outcomes and figure out where do you want to end up, and then work backwards to figure out your own activities and your own outputs. And as I said, that is more of what we'll be going into on Monday.
And I just want to reiterate what Megan just said, which is that the approach on Monday will absolutely be to start to look at, here are some examples of activities that would be well aligned with because also, we say small or medium, but there's strands in there. Is it the K-8 small, or is it the high school small? Because those focuses are different. What they're hoping for you to be looking at is different. But we will be absolutely sharing with you some ideas, if that's helpful to you. Hopefully it is to some, of what are the types of activities that would be competitive and well aligned in a small size, say K-8 strand, right? And that will help you then take these next steps. Great. Any other questions? I've seen one person whose video has gone on a couple times, and I just want to make sure that you aren't in a situation, whoever that was, who that you can't type in a question, but you wanted to ask one. So I did want to give folks the option, if you're not able to type something and what you'd prefer to do is to come on and ask a question live. Okay, wonderful. So I don't think we have any more questions. So the next thing that I'm going to do, Megan, can you go, okay, everybody close your eyes for a second, because she's going to go through the slides really fast. And I know that sometimes can make people dizzy. We're going to go to the last couple slides.
Yeah. There?
Yes, here we are. We've just finished our Q&A, so now we're on next steps. Next steps will be, after this is done, I'm going to email you all thanking you for coming, and I will share with you a logic model template. It's not the pretty ones, it's the practical ones. So it's substance, not flash. So use it, or if you have another one that you like, there are certainly plenty on the internet. Just a reminder that the next workshop will be on Monday, and it will be focused specifically on aligning your project with this RFP. And that invitation will go out not in the same email, because I'm sending that invitation to everybody, to all of our participants. And then the last thing is I just wanted to update you on supports. We've actually done that sort of in response to several of the questions, right? So probably at the beginning of next week, but perhaps for some of you, especially those of you who have panel comments that you want support on, I will be attaching you to a particular grant expert who will be working with you on certain items of your requests. In the emails where I connect you guys, just please know that in that email, it will say what that expert is supporting you on. I'll give you an example. Many of you have asked, not surprisingly, for support on the bio sketches, and I get it. The new Science CV is super fun. The person who's going to be supporting you on ideation is not the same person who's going to be supporting you on your bio sketch. So just you'll know that, and they'll know that. So if you start asking questions on the thing that they're not there to support you on, they'll let you know. But you'll be connected with your expert for specific tasks over the next week or so. And then again, we will have this next workshop on Monday, and possibly, and Megan and I will be meeting after this, we may have one or two more over the course of the next period of time. Next slide. I just wanted to thank you all again for being here, to remind you that please communicate with me all you want. You are my participants now, so I am here to support you. So this is the email address to get in touch with me. And this QR code goes to our website page, but I will also share that link out again as well. And we just want to, again, thank STARS Computing Corps and the NSF for the support that has allowed us to provide this technical support. And we will hope to see you all on Monday and again very soon.